presumptuous self-involvement to have a child simply because you decide that you want one. I feel like the pro-kid side of this week kind of overwhelmed the discussion, so I've got to come at it from the other side. But really though, how self-involved is it to have a kid for the purpose of passing on your own legacy? And furthermore, how much hubris does it require to think that you would be a good parent, especially given that you avowedly can't figure out how to pass your own legacy on your own terms? I'm coming at this from a different angle simply because I think that there is a bit of a perception out there, and maybe it's declining a bit, but that people who decide not to have kids for whatever reason are inherently selfish, that they don't, they're so self-involved that they don't want to share their life or devote 18 years of their time and money and effort and heartbreak and everything to raising somebody else. They'd rather just, I don't know, pursue their own self-interest. And how ridiculously selfish is that? I do find it interesting though that DK brought up the point that every single one of your ancestors had sex and children. And that's kind of weird to think about. So if you don't have kids, you were the first in a very, very long historical precedent to make that decision, which is kind of crazy. But also, let's consider the fact that every single one of your ancestors decided to have a kid and bring someone into existence without their consent. No procreation without representation. We were not consulted. We were not even advised. We didn't even have 5 minutes notice. Now, I don't agree with Niall about this idea that the planet is in tatters and perhaps irreparably so, but one of the things that I think it illustrates is that this generation, and perhaps to an extent the generation before us, is probably now the most aware than we have ever been of the global and social consequences of our decision whether or not to have children. We know just how impoverished a lot of people are, and it's not in some abstract, there are impoverished people on some distant planet, as it may have seemed when our social spheres of influence were very, very small. But now, you know, a Google search can turn up pictures of horrific atrocities and living conditions that are kind of hard to distance ourselves from. But it's weird because it puts even more gravity on the decision whether or not to have kids, because it's no longer just a question of, you know, is this the right decision for me and my partner? Am I in a position where I can responsibly take care of a child financially, emotionally, etc.? But now it's also a question of, am I depriving other people of resources by deciding to have a child? And is it right for me to make that decision? You know, there are children who were born 2 seconds ago in much worse conditions who also had no say about whether or not they wanted to be born and grow up in this environment. And by deciding to devote time and money to raising a child of your own, you could just as well spend that time and money caring for people who already currently are alive. And that's not a process that gets undone. And so I think that becomes a difficult decision. Do I have the right, and furthermore, am I qualified to make that decision? Finally, I don't even think that I personally would be a good parent. I'm a rather impatient and somewhat grouchy person. Then again, I look at other people who have kids and I'm like, I'd be a way better parent than that person. And then I get down on myself for, you know, looking down on others, and I feel worse about myself, and it just reinforces that idea that I would be a terrible, terrible parent. Also, genetics. But let's move on. So I picked on DK a little bit in that rant, but to be fair, he recommended that I read a very good book that has made me question everything that I do with my life. It's called You Are Not a Gadget, and it's got me thinking and questioning all these things, and it's his fault. So this is payback. I'm going to question your child having policies. But the book has gotten me thinking about how we interact socially in today's sort of world. And I guess this kind of ties into that whole social sphere of influence thing. Also, Google Plus is dying, and Google Plus had circles, and circles are what I wanted to talk about today. If I look back through my life, there's almost like a linear progression of individual circles, friendship circles, work circles, community theater circles, a chess club circle, and every single one of them had kind of a different impact on my life. And it's weird now because there are definitely so many circles that I have really no contact with at all. And then it becomes that sort of weird thing where, you encounter one person from that circle and they're like, oh yeah, and you want to interact with them as the chess playing version of you, or as the community theater person, or as the classmate person. And then there's that conflict of that I don't know that I'm that person anymore. And what's worse is when you get two people from different circles that are on at the same time, and then you don't know which mask you're supposed to wear. But I guess that's my question for you, and I'm probably going to leave my answer till next week because I spent so much time continuing to talk about children. What are the circles that you've progressed through in your life? Are there any that you felt were particularly impactful, and how have they helped to shape you? Obviously, we're all in the YouTube circle. That's a thing, and some of us may be in completely different circles now. I've got a coworker circle, I've got my family circle, all of these circles, but not on Google+, thankfully. I'm not good with transitions, and I will see you next week.